Now, I'd like to be able to open it up to questions and comments. If there are things that I haven't covered that you want to hear about, please feel free. Jennifer Goslin from my office, I think, has got a list of people who have asked questions, so she's got a microphone in case so everybody in the audience can hear, and I'd be happy to start it up.
Thank you, Congressman. First person is Skip Murphy. Had a question about the debt ceiling.
Are we going to raise it?
Well, actually, yes. Part of that question is there, the backdrop that the federal expenditures have doubled over the last 10 years, gone up 27% in the last 2 years, we are up against the debt ceiling. There's basically, from what I see, is 4 different choices. Either you just expand it and keep on going, or you expand it and the folks in Congress say, we will do that, but only with drastic cuts, which it sounds like you're doing right now, or a total refusal of doing that, or just refusal and say, you have to accept everything that we tell you to do, as you said before, going back to the 2008 spending limits. Where do you stand on this, or on those options at this point?
Well, and I don't know if I mentioned in my earlier remarks, but one of the more intriguing things that's going to occur in this Congress is every single week that we're in session, a proposed reduction in spending is going to come to the floor of the House to be voted on. I think that's important because if this truly is about trying to get us on a path of fiscal responsibility, we cannot continue $1.5 trillion deficits. It's going to continue to drive that debt up from $14 trillion. I've seen projections to $25 trillion if we do nothing. So one of the first issue again is the continuing resolution, passing that for the rest of the year, and then working on the budget for next federal fiscal year. The debt ceiling vote should likely come up somewhere at the earliest late March, maybe in April, maybe in May. So I've done a lot of research on it. I want to make sure that I make the responsible, right decision on this particular issue. And as with any other issue, it's much more complicated than it looks. First of all, the debt limit would have to be raised at the request of the President because spending in past years, we've obligated expenditures, past Congresses have obligated past expenditures. So I feel like I am faced with the challenges or the decisions that have been made right or wrong by previous Congresses. There has been discussion about not raising it, and what does that do to the full faith and credit of the country? And I don't believe anybody wants to see the full faith and faith of the country minimized or reduced. We don't want to see our bond rating downgraded. As a mayor, one of the things that I staunchly protected was our bond rating, because that's directly contributing to how much we're going to pay in interest for when we borrow for capital projects. And who pays for that? You do. So if the debt ceiling was not raised, there's already discussion and legislation that's being proposed in the Senate and in the House to prioritize payments. It would start with our debt to make sure that we don't default, and they would literally go into vendor payments. It would probably also be coupled with some spending reductions. The President talked about a spending freeze, hiring freeze, things that I've done in the past to manage budgets, but that only addresses a very small part of the problem. The way I view it right now, and earlier this week I had a roundtable meeting with some executives and small bankers here in New Hampshire, asking them about this very issue. And without seeing any legislation yet, we won't see it for probably at least another month, it's difficult for me to tell you how exactly I would vote, because I haven't seen what is being placed in front of us. But here's what I envision. If the debt ceiling is raised for a short period of time, it would have to accompany a few things: massive spending reductions, a plan in 2011 and 2012 to see that debt ceiling number come back down below the 14.2. And then a series of economic initiatives to see a stronger economic growth projection beyond the 3 to 3.2% that we're hearing from the White House and economists and the CBO. The economy is still in a very fragile state. There are those who would argue we're on a recovery. I'm not sure that I would call it that at this point. We still have the unemployment rate around 9.5. We still have housing costs or housing sales fairly low. We still have a underemployment rate that's relatively high. We don't have large businesses spending their cash reserves. They're just, right now it's about $1 trillion roughly that's sitting in their bank accounts. And they're not willing to spend because they don't have the predictability of the economic situation. And we don't have small business owners that are getting that immediate access to capital to expand their businesses. So we're still very fragile. What I'd prefer to see is the conversation move away from the debt ceiling and focus on meaningful spending reforms. And I feel that, you know, with a $1.5 trillion deficit, we've got to cut roughly $100 billion a month in order to ensure that debt ceiling doesn't have to be raised. So there is some legislation that I'm looking at that does just that. And I'm hoping the conversation is about what can we ultimately do to get the country on the path of sustainability in its spending and spending reductions. So as the one thing I would commit to is when the legislation comes forward, you're going to hear from me, you know, again, and I'm going to listen to you about what the proposal is. I'd invite everyone to take a look at the proposal and study it, and tell me what you really think. But I don't want to negatively impact the credit markets or the stock market. I also want to make sure that we're doing the right thing to give us a path of more fiscal responsibility and a sounder economy.